Hey everyone, so today I am going to be doing a character examination of Robert Baratheon, and then so just a fair warning, spoiler alert for the whole series of Game of Thrones, and then also just to be safe, spoiler alert for The Lord of the Rings, just because I am going to be making some kind of parallels to The Lord of the Rings in my examination. So what I'm going to start off with is a brief summary of kind of Robert's life and all the key events, and then I'm going to kind of go into why I feel like he is such an interesting character. So just to start off, at a very young age, Robert was the firstborn son of the Baratheon family, and really young, him and Stannis were waiting at the shore for their parents to. They had been gone on a trip and they were coming into dock, and their boat crashed. And Robert and Stannis got to see that happen, and both their parents passed away. Very sad. And so from there, Robert was sent to live with Jon Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie, where he became Jon Arryn's ward. And then during that time, he met Ned Stark, and the two became really, really good friends and pretty close to brothers as the two could. And then during that time, while they were growing up in the Eyrie, Robert Baratheon was betrothed to Lyanna Stark, Ned Stark's sister, and Robert was really excited to marry her. He really liked her. He was in love with her. And then Lyanna Stark went missing. She was kidnapped, or at least allegedly kidnapped, by Rhaegar Targaryen. This was obviously a really, really big deal. And so what happened is Ned's father and brother, Rickard and Brandon, they went down to King's Landing to kind of confront the Mad King and ask for their daughter slash sister back. And the Mad King burned. Well, he burned Ned's father alive, and then Ned's brother watched and was strangled. Horrible scene, horrible thing. Very traumatic. And so from there, Ned, Robert, and Jon Arryn decide to basically start a rebellion against the Mad King, both to kind of reclaim um, Ned's sister, and then also just as because Ned's father and Ned's brother were just so brutally executed. And then this rebellion was so successful because so many people were unhappy with how the Mad King was ruling things. Tywin Lannister had been the Mad King's hand for a good part of his rule, and he had kept a lot of the peace, but then after Tywin Lannister and the Mad King, when they kind of went their separate ways, things got pretty bad, where the Mad King was doing a lot of weird stuff. He had his pyromancer as his hand, and as you would assume, a pyromancer isn't necessarily the best hand of the king. And so people weren't necessarily happy with the Mad King, which made them pretty primed for a rebellion. And one of the only things that was kind of keeping people not from just outright just going against the Mad King already was because of what a charismatic figure Rhaegar Targaryen was, the Mad King's son and the next in line for the throne. People were like, oh, okay, we'll just wait until the Mad King, until he passes away, and then Rhaegar will come. And he was expected to be like a really, really good king. He was super charismatic, a great guy by all accounts. And so it made it very surprising when he kidnapped Lyanna Stark and then just went missing. I mean, nobody knew where he was. And so that was kind of it. So with Rhaegar gone, the Mad King being the Mad King, it was time for an uprising and a rebellion. And so Robert, Ned, and Jon Arryn, they lead this rebellion, and it is very successful. I mean, they are going through the towns, winning battles. I mean, it was going really well. And then one of the most climactic moments of the rebellion was when Rhaegar Targaryen came back from wherever he had been, and he went and rallied all the king's forces who were still loyal to the king, and they marched north, and then Robert and his guys are coming south, and then there's this big battle at the Trident, and obviously we're dealing with fiction, and so during this battle, Robert and Rhaegar Targaryen, they meet in the battle, and they have this giant epic battle, and it is, in my opinion, probably the coolest battle to happen before the series begins. I mean, just thinking about it just gets me so excited, because that was probably really cool to watch. I mean, both of them were just in the prime of their lives. Robert and Rhaegar were two of the best fighters in the kingdom, and they went head to head. The stakes were so high. I mean, they were fighting over Lyanna, and then Rhaegar, who was considered to be one of the best fighters, Robert defeats, and he smashes his warhammer into Rhaegar Targaryen's breastplate. And it's kind of like a little bit of the lore of the battle is that Robert Baratheon shatters Rhaegar's breastplate, and then all the rubies come flying off. And so where the battle took place on the Trident, that specific area is called the Ruby Ford, because all Rhaegar Targaryen was decked out in rubies and whatnot. And so he basically, it signified the death of Rhaegar Targaryen, and just in this epic battle. And so from there, I mean, the rebellion with Rhaegar dead, it was not looking good. But Robert was badly injured during this fight. And so Ned, Jon Arryn, they continue marching south, but on their way south, Tywin Lannister comes to King's Landing, basically convinces the Mad King to let him into the city, in which case he sacks the rest of the city. And during this time, also Jaime Lannister kills the Mad King. This is not super relevant to Robert's story, but it does set up kind of the fact that Robert wasn't there originally when everything went down in King's Landing. But then after he got better, he came to King's Landing, and then he kind of claimed the throne for a couple of reasons. One, he was incredibly charismatic. I mean, while it was Ned, Jon Arryn's, and Robert's rebellion, Robert was this kind of charismatic leader of it. I mean, Ned and Jon Arryn, while they did lead it, it was Robert was kind of the face of it. And so there was that angle, but he was also, because all the Targaryens had been killed besides Daenerys and Viserys, who were presumed to be dead by some, and then there was also people who knew that they were still alive. They were gone. They were off in Essos. So all the Targaryens on Westeros were gone. Robert Baratheon then became the closest in line to the Targaryen blood because on his mother's side he had distant relationships to the Targaryens, and so he actually also had the best claim in terms of like Targaryen lineage. And then on top of that, he was just this charismatic, great leader who had just, led the rebellion against the king. And so he seemed like the perfect choice. And so from there, though, because during the uprising, Tywin Lannister ordered the Mountain, his like one of his number one soldiers, to kill the sons and the son and daughter of Rhaegar Targaryen in just this very brutal way. I mean, they're little kids and they kill them. And Tywin Lannister, as kind of like a sign of good faith, presents their bodies to Robert Baratheon to show like, hey, even though I was the Mad King's hand, I am loyal to you now. And Robert Baratheon accepts this token of good faith because he was so angry at the Targaryens. But because of this, Ned Stark views this as a horrific war crime, and him and Robert essentially have a falling out as a result. Ned just kind of leaves and to go find his sister. And then afterwards, Ned does find his sister, and he finds her dead, is what he tells people. And from that, through the grieving over Ned's sister, Robert and Ned kind of like reconnect. So they did have a falling out, but then they become friends again. I mean, they're like brothers. You knew they were gonna be friends again. But then from there, it's looking like, so Tywin Lannister, his daughter Cersei Lannister, she was kind of betrothed to Rhaegar, and so she was gonna be queen someday. And then with Robert having taken the throne, Lyanna was gone. He needed a wife. Robert marries Cersei as a way to kind of also just a sign of good faith to House Lannister, because House Lannister, one of the richest family in Westeros, as well as just a fresh army, because the Lannisters stayed out of the rebellion, and so they held a lot of power at this time, which made it, which gave it a lot of sense as to why marrying Cersei was a good idea. But Cersei and Robert's marriage gets off to a really rocky start, because originally Cersei was actually really excited to marry Robert, because like I said, Robert was this fit, charming, charismatic guy. He had just led the rebellion. She was excited to marry him. She was also excited to marry Rhaegar. I think she just wanted to be a queen a little bit. But Robert wasn't like a bad guy, at least seemingly. But then on their wedding night, when it was like time to like consummate the marriage, like Robert was incredibly drunk, and in the middle of it, like he apparently whispers in her ear, like Lyanna, just showing Cersei that he wasn't even thinking about Cersei, he was thinking about Lyanna. And this just kind of, from there, Cersei resented Robert, and then Robert went on to not be a very good husband. He cheated on Cersei constantly. He did not respect her. He hit her at times. Just not a very good husband to Cersei whatsoever. He remained beloved by the people just because he had a tendency. So during his rule, he also, I forgot to mention, he chose Jon Arryn as his hand because, Jon Arryn had essentially raised him, and he really trusted Jon Arryn, and it made a lot of sense. And Jon Arryn essentially ran the kingdom because Robert was drinking, having fun with the ladies. He was not really doing much, but he was beloved. The people loved him, and from there, he kind of like, his relationship with Cersei grew incredibly distant, which will come into play later. But then eventually Jon Arryn passes away after many years of ruling. And so from there, Robert is a little suspicious about the way that Jon Arryn died, and so he goes up north and asks Ned Stark to be his hand. And Ned, this very honorable guy, just even though Robert's like his best friend, he still like treats him like a king first. It's just Ned has this weird moral code where he is morals and honor above everything. And so he says yes, even though he really doesn't want to, and he goes south to Robert to be his hand. Along the way, kind of from there, Robert and Ned have a bit of a falling out again, because which harkens back to their first falling out, is because over in Essos, it is discovered that Daenerys has married Khal Drogo, and she is possibly pregnant with Khal Drogo's baby. This Robert then wants to go send assassins to kill Daenerys, just because he doesn't want them coming back with he doesn't want them coming with the Dothraki and thinking that they will, destroy his kingdom, which is ironic considering Robert was like exactly right. It's weird because like you agree with Ned when you're watching the show, but Robert was exactly right about what would happen. And so, but anyway, so he wants to send assassins to kill Daenerys, and Ned is against this. He is against sending assassins to kill Daenerys, who they view as basically a child, and then to basically, it's less to kill Daenerys and more to kill her unborn baby, and then in which case Ned like offers one of the kind of coolest lines in the show, in my opinion, where he's just like tells Robert, like, at what point did you Robert Baratheon begin to tremble at the shadow of an unborn child, just showing like, just as a way to really disrespect Robert and say like, you're afraid of this baby who has never even been born. What kind of leader are you? And so he kind of leaves. He gives up his hand position. And then there's I want to kind of stay focused on Robert. Some stuff happens with Ned and Jaime. Ned gets hurt. Robert tells Ned, you're my hand, forget you. And then because Ned and Jaime fought, Cersei is upset with kind of Ned, and so she's like, while Robert and is giving the hand position back to Ned, him and like Cersei's there, and she's like kind of saying stuff to Ned, and Robert decides to hit her, in which case is one of the other coldest lines in the whole show is uttered, where Robert, just hits Cersei, and then Cersei goes, "I'll wear it like a badge of honor," and he goes, "Keep talking, I'll honor you again," and it's just such a cold line, and it's just like, well, Robert is like a likable character. He's very abusive towards Cersei. I mean, there's no denying it. And so from there, Ned becomes king, and Robert goes on like a hunting trip, and then like he leaves Ned as king regent while he's gone. And then during this hunting trip, Robert is drinking a lot, and a boar comes, and he's like, "I'm gonna fight this boar." And the boar gores him, and he suffers fatal wounds. And then we later find out that all the wine that he was drinking did make him drunk, but there was also like a bit of a sedative in there that made him more sluggish. And so it was basically, and we find out that Cersei is the person who like was responsible for the sedative in his wine. And so basically Cersei Cersei kills Robert. Basically, it's through some kind of, leaves her a lot of deniability along the way, especially because Robert was known to be a pretty brash guy, and the idea that he would go and stupidly fight a boar was very in line with who he was. And so he suffers mortal wounds. He tells Ned, as his like kind of dying wish, is that Ned will rule as king until his firstborn son Joffrey comes of age, and then like Ned kind of like alters, because he tells Ned to like write this down and like give it like the seal of the king, but Ned kind of changes it to my firstborn heir, like not Joffrey specifically, because Ned has figured out that who Robert thinks his 3 kids are actually not his kids, and so Ned like kind of wants to find Robert's bastard children and kind of put them in charge instead. And so because Robert has a lot of bastard children because he had a lot of affairs on Cersei. And so basically from there, I mean, Robert passes away, and the strongest legacy of Robert can be felt with his actual children, his bastard children, throughout the rest of the show. That is where you can feel him the most, primarily with Gendry, obviously, because he's really the only one in the show, at least, that we get to see. And we see Gendry kind of it's like something that people I feel like people don't really catch on, but like Gendry uses a hammer as his weapon, which is kind of like a parallel to Robert, who also fought with a warhammer. And so that's kind of the history of Robert. And why I feel like Robert, with the biggest thing that Robert accomplishes, and I feel like what George R. R. Martin was trying to do with Robert Baratheon, it comes from an interview that I saw him do one time, where he says he thought that one of the weirdest things about Lord of the Rings is, so Aragorn becomes king at the end, and you're just like, okay, he's king, but like, do we know if he was a good ruler? Like, what was Aragorn's tax policy? Like, what did he do as ruler? And this is, this is something that was curious to him. And in my opinion, I don't know if this is true, but this makes me think that from what he said, that Robert is kind of Aragorn what like the realistic version of what would have happened. You have this charismatic guy, he like, claims the throne, he ends this like, this tyrannical rule. Obviously it's not exactly like Aragorn, but like this guy who everybody loves, and he becomes king. And then, it turns out that the qualities that make someone a good, rebellion leader, a good warrior, aren't necessarily what make a good king. This like lustful attitude and everything. And it doesn't really pan out. Robert is a terrible husband. Robert is a bad ruler, even though he rules during a time of peace, and it's mostly because of Jon Arryn. And just the stability in the region really has very little to do with what Robert did. The main kind of source of stability that he provides is that he is very charismatic and people love him. I mean, not even just the people of Westeros. I mean, the people of in our world, we love Robert. Robert is definitely like a fan favorite. But he just kind of represents, and he really, like, another thing is his physical appearance. Is he was this like very fit kind of guy, this like great warrior, and he just really lets himself go and becomes very overweight, and just drinks all the time, does things with women all the time. His lusts consume him, and he is just kind of this embodiment of like the people who the conquerors aren't the good rulers, which is honestly kind of foreshadowing for Daenerys, because Daenerys is, not exactly, but there is this kind of thing about Daenerys where she's a conqueror, she's not a ruler. Daenerys does not really do a good job of ruling at any point in the show, but she is excellent at conquering. This is similar to Robert. Robert was great at leading the rebellion. He was a great warrior, but he wasn't the best ruler. And I think that this is playing off of kind of this. Robert Jordan loves to take like classic fantasy tropes and kind of turn them on their head. And so this person who you would expect to have been this great ruler doesn't actually do it. This is like you get like this with Robert's story specifically. You get like the after part. You get the like because Robert's rebellion would be like this like really that would be the story in like a traditional fantasy, and then he would become king, and then that's where it would end. And so we get kind of the after with this, and we see that that things don't necessarily pan out that way, and I think he's really interesting because of that. And so that's the end of this kind of character examination. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any like recommendations or like things that you feel like I could have done better, things that you enjoyed about this, please leave a comment down below. I really want to do more of these character examinations, and I want to do better at them. I know that this probably wasn't like this wasn't as good as it could have been, so please leave like criticism down below. I would love to hear like things that I could do differently, and other characters that you would like me to do character examinations for. Like I said, I really want to do a lot of these. I find that looking at characters and kind of the themes around them and everything is really interesting. I chose to do Robert because like while he is like a really cool character, he doesn't have like the most depth to him, so I thought that he would be a good way to kind of like jump into this, something that I really want to start doing more on my channel. And so like I said, comment any criticisms down below, any characters you want to see, anything at all, please let me know down below. If you enjoyed this examination, please like and subscribe, and have a great day.